I am a solution architect with Red Hat, here today to show you guys how to build a very simple decision model based on some simple parameters that you put in there. So I'll be logging into my GUI, Business Central, which is Red Hat's GUI for Decision Manager and for Process Automation Manager. But today we'll just be focusing on decisions. So as I log in, you'll see here as our entrance screen that we have two major options. The first is to design, and this is more the authoring of the decision. You actually create the decision, and then deploy is where you actually deploy the final assembled piece together. And you can actually do some administrative work in there as well. All our stuff will go into key. But for right now, let's just focus on the design. And you'll see in here, the first screen that you see is spaces. So particularly by default out of the box, there is a MySpace space. But we'll just create a new one for the context of today, and we'll just call it something simple like, spelled correctly, sandbox. So I'll click on add, and you'll see in here right now that I have a space for sandbox. If I go in here, typically if I had lots of projects, they would come in here, but I don't have any yet. So let's go ahead and add a new project. Okay, so we'll give it a simple name, car insurance premium calculator. And this demo that I'll do for you will actually calculate insurance premiums, spelling, based on age and prior history. So I hope that's self-explanatory. And we'll go through and we'll add this. And you'll see that we actually have our first view of this project. So you go from spaces to projects, and now we can actually add assets to this specific project. So for that, we'll add a DMN. There are lots of assets that you can add in here. I mean, maybe in other tutorials I'll go through them all, but for today we're just going to focus on DMN. And then we're going to give our decision a very simple name, calculate premium. And then the package, you can typically reference this on three different levels. Com being available to everyone, or everyone within the com namespace. Com.sandbox is underneath that space. And then obviously car insurance premium calculator is specifically to this project. But we'll really use it as default, and you can actually set your default packages elsewhere. But for now we'll leave it as default, so that way we don't touch anything that's out of scope. So we click on this, and you'll see the first thing we see here is our actual visual designer. On the left is our decision graph, and you'll see this actually build as we go along. And over here is where we actually design the actual decision. So I'm going to start off by adding a couple of input parameters, and then if you want to have a look at the DMN notation to understand what each of these are, you can actually reference that separately. But this one here is actually for input parameters, and we've got two. So let's start off by giving these names. So input data 1 will be age. Click on that, and input data 2 will be prior history. Nice and simple. Now these don't actually have types right now, so if I go to my properties view on the right here, you'll see that I actually can see the name, and underneath that is the type. So an age is always a number, as we know. And for prior history, of course, it really depends on what sort of accident which really decides your premiums, but for now we're just going to use a simple boolean, true or false. So now that we have two input parameters, we need to figure out where we want to send those. And for that, we're actually going to create a decision. So if I actually use my dragger here and I drag with some arrows, it's actually basically saying, take these input parameters and go to this decision. Now let's give this a more descriptive name than just decision 1. We'll call it calculate, I guess. I don't want to kind of use the same name over and over again, so we'll just use the word calculate. And we want this to actually return a number. So there you have it, our very first look at how to create a decision. But what does this actually do? All we've done so far is drag a decision on here, so we actually need to go through and edit the decision. Now there are many different expressions you can use to actually run a calculate. The first and foremost is probably a literal expression, which is what is self-explanatory. It's essentially returning back a literal value. So you could return 100, or you could return a word like Bob. Literal expression is just the actual literal of it. There are functions from JavaScript, and then there are things like invocation, but today we're going to focus on the decision table. And as you can see here, the two input parameters that I created are actually here, and my return parameter, calculate, which is this decision, actually comes about here. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's just start putting some data in. So I want to first look at ages between 18 and 25. So this syntax you're seeing here, this is DMN syntax, and 18 ... 25 means between. So the first thing we'll say is, have they had any prior history? And we'll say no prior history. So these people have been wonderful. So, so their insurance is probably going to be about, I don't know, let's just say it about $1,000. That sounds a lot higher, but yeah. So from there, I can either insert another row below, or I'm just going to duplicate, which makes it easier. But let's just say they did have history. Their insurance premium is going to be a lot higher. So let's just say it's a lot higher. We're going to say 33% higher. We're going to put it at 1,500. So we're just going to go through and build a few more of these. So we're going to go next and look at ages 26 to 50. Now, once again, if they've had no history, they've been very good and a lot older now, so their premiums will go down quite a bit. We'll put them down to, say, $500. And then duplicate this. And if they have had history, because they're older, it's not going to be as high as it was before. So we'll probably put it at about 750. And then finally, let's add two more. So I'm going to use a different operator for this, logical operator. So let's just duplicate this. And this time we're going to say greater than 50. So if you do greater than equal to 50, it will actually overlap with this. So greater than 50 implies 51. And once again, if they've had no history, this is the quintessential perfect person, and we'll give them a $200. We'll duplicate this one last time. And if they have had a history, a little bit higher, but you know, they're in the much older bracket, not as crazy as before, so we'll say around 400. Okay, so let's save this. And you'll see right now we've actually gone ahead and created our first decision. Two input parameters going into a calculate DMN, and then from there it actually returns a value based on what the input parameters show in that decision tree. So nice and simple. So I go back to my project, you'll see it's actually created it in here. I can go ahead and build this. So I'm going to click on build and install, and it was happy. And then from here I can actually deploy it. So when I click on deploy, you'll see it's actually happy. So this actual decision is now being pushed onto the key server. So if I go into my deployment details, you'll see that this is the actual name of the artifact that has been pushed. And it has a nice long name, and it's got an underscore 1.0.0. You can actually set the increment, version increment. And it has snapshot for right now, which if you go into production, this will all disappear. But from here, we've actually got our first premium. So from here, we need to go to the key server, and the key server here typically starts off with a Swagger user interface. And under here are lots of RESTful operations that you can use to actually discover things about the key server. So for example, you could look at the config or health checks. A lot of these are just very simple. They're just GET requests. But for what we're going to do today, we're going to focus on the DMN model, because that's what we've done. So the first thing we'll look at is actually evaluating a decision for a given input. So in here, you'll actually see it's looking for the container ID. Now to get to the container ID, I actually just have to go to server container/contain. So you're not seeing my my URI here, but I'm actually just going to refresh this, and you'll see here that the latest car insurance premium calculator is actually here with some messages around deployment and you know, a lot of the configuration items that are in here as well. So if I actually click on this ID, and I'm going to append this to the back of the URI. Oops, I forgot the T on the end, sorry about that. So here is the actual information about that particular DMN container that we've created. And if I actually go into it, oops, sorry, not typing so well today. You'll actually see here, this is specific information about that DMN. So you'll see in here that there's an age, which if you guys remember, we created of type number. There's the decision itself, which we called calculate, because we didn't want to keep naming it prior times over. And then there's a Boolean in here. It says Boolean type of prior history. So it's actually gone ahead and discovered what we need to do. So this information is going to be very useful. So if I go back to my key server and I actually want to evaluate this, you'll see in here I actually have a Swagger post. You can use Postman or any other sort of API tool, even a browser could do it, curl. But for today, we're just going to use Postman because it's clean and simple. So I'm going to just try this one out based on that container ID that I got. So let's give it a go. So once that container ID, which as you guys remember, it's from here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that into here. And then it's going to require a body. Now, building a body, there are a lot of, down here, there are actually a lot of different parameters or elements that you can throw into the body. But what I'll do is I've actually pre-built one, or I'm actually going to borrow one from another demo that I did. And it kind of looks like this. right? So there's the namespace of the model, the actual name of the model, and then the parameters in here. Now you can actually also trigger directly from a decision asset, but for today we're just going to do it on the model. So let's get this new model namespace, which I believe you'll see that attribute is here. So I'm just going to copy this over, go into here, and that's my new namespace, and it needs the model name. So if I go back into here and I get the model name, it's going to be calculate premium. So I paste that into there. And then we have these two context variables. Now I've changed the Boolean to prior history. So if I go in here and just add prior history, you'll see that it's in there. Now if you guys are actually wondering where else you can get the model namespace and the name, you can actually go back into your project. So let's go in here. So if I click into my DMN, you'll see on the parent, the namespace is actually here as well, as is the actual name of the model. So you can actually get it in here as well if you're having trouble getting through the XML file. So now that I've done this, I've got these parameters in here. I'm going to try it out. But before I do that, I'm going to move everything over to JSON. Oh dear, it actually didn't save my... Oh, that's annoying. Sorry guys, I'm going to have to do this again. Probably should have done that first. So let's get our namespace again. Throw that in there, and then let's get our model name, calculate premium. And I like to just cut and paste instead of typing it, just in case I have fat fingered anything. And then once again, it needs those two parameters. So we've got age is already defined, and the other one was just prior history. So I'm going to throw that in here. And let's now try and execute this. Okay, so we're very happy. It gave us a 200 response. And in here, you'll see the result was 1,000. And the reason for that is that we picked someone who was young, under the age of 25, that has no prior history. Now, if you remember, if they did have prior history, there should be 1,500 from memory is, I think, what we threw down there. So there you go, right? So the return context actually brings you back a result. So you've got two different places here, so that you can actually see the result and the actual status of it. So just to give it one last quick test to verify it's working, I think we said over the age of 50, so let's do 60, and no accidents to that age, which would be phenomenal. And you'll see in here that that's the cheapest calculation that we've got, age of 60. So the result is actually 200. So there you go, a nice simple look at how to actually create a DMN model and how to actually reference it. Once again, you can use this via Postman or browser or curl. They actually do give you a curl URL in here that you can copy and paste, and you can do this in there. Of course, it does depend also on what sort of authentication you have. So I'm using basic auth, so I would actually have to put my basic authentications in here, which means showing my password. So I won't be doing that for now, but quite simply, you can also just use this Swagger container. So, okay, so I hope this was very beneficial for you, and look forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you.